You're good. Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yes, great. First, I'm Stephanie Markin. I'm Executive Director of Education Research here at Gallup, and I just want to thank you all for being here and spending the morning with us. I think we can all agree that on the issue of technology in school systems, it's really not if it'll be used, but how it will be used. And so it's often in that conversation that we actually miss out on really important perspectives. We often hear from one or two populations. This study is really unique because this morning you'll be hearing data that's from really three distinct and important perspectives. From the student perspective, which I think we can all agree is often undercovered and undercounted, and also importantly from the administrator and teacher perspective. So I just want to thank NewSchools Venture Fund in engaging in this research, selecting Gallup as their partner, but also importantly covering those three distinct and really critical points of view. So this morning we'll kick off with a brief data presentation from senior researcher and my colleague here at Gallup, Valerie Calderon. Will walk through some of the main findings from the study to provide important context that's obviously featured in the full report, which is available to you all. And then we'll transition to hear a little bit more from NewSchools Venture Funds directly from Stacey Childress, CEO of NSVF, and really learn what they're up to and some important perspective and implications of this research. And then finally, we'll transition to a panel-based discussion in which we'll invite several experts to the stage and really engage in a deeper discussion around the implications of this research from a practitioner perspective and from a theoretical perspective. And then finally, we'd love your good questions and invite your good questions, so please, throughout the morning, feel free to scroll down anything that comes to mind, and we'd love to answer those during our questions and answers session. So with that, I will just thank you again for being here and transition over to Valerie Calderon.
Thank you, Steph. It is really a delight to get to share this story, especially since I am not the only person who helped this story to be a thing. So big thanks to NewSchools team and to the Gallup team for the hard work over the past year. I'm really excited to share some highlights with you. And as my colleague Steph mentioned, please do refer to the full report and access that, because as one of the researchers on this, I can promise this is just the tip of the iceberg of some good research and data. I do want to set a little bit of context for you about our study. We did have items that asked about device usage in schools, but we also shape for our respondents what digital learning tools are. And this is our working definition, which we humbly submit. We made very broad for our respondents. We wanted to reduce the burden for them in terms of what they were thinking about and what they were using, and make that very broad for them in for their responses. A little bit about the four populations that we surveyed. We did include students in grades 3 through 12. We used Gallup's proprietary panel to recruit students to participate. We sent emails to the parents and guardians in those households to secure consent to interview their student. We interviewed teachers in PK through 12, focusing on core subject areas, but I was really delighted that we secured a very strong population of special education teachers and also English language learner specialists in our population, which I thought was really terrific. We also included U.S. public school principals as well as U.S. public school district administrators, the majority of which were superintendents of schools, but also assistant supes, and we included those with media and technology and C&I directors as well, those titles in our survey as well. Now to share with you a few highlights. As Steph mentioned, we know that technology, of course, is being used extensively in schools, but I was perhaps maybe a little surprised to see just how much. So nearly all of the students who are in grades 3 through 5 say that they spend at least some time using digital learning tools in a typical school day. And for teachers, nearly 2/3 of teachers that we surveyed say they use digital learning tools every day. Half of teachers say that their students use them every day to learn. And this was really aligned with what we heard from students themselves, which we'll share that with you here in just a moment as well. Now, I think another interesting thing, you see a little bit of variance in everyday usage by core subject area or learning area taught, but I don't think it's a great deal of variance. So we have nearly 6 in 10 of those who say their main subject area is science, saying that they use digital learning tools to teach every day, and 7 in 10 ELA teachers. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that it felt fairly clustered to me. We don't have the data showing there for computer science teachers. We were just a little shy of Gallup's threshold to show you those data, but know that it was about 8 in 10. So not surprisingly, they were more likely to report that they had everyday usage. I really did like this question, and again, perhaps not so much of a surprise, but I think very critical in terms of what we saw here. So we asked all 3 educator populations what 3 resources they trust most among this list that you see here to help them decide which tools to use. And for all 3 educator populations, teachers are the most trusted resource, with at least 8 in 10 saying so. And I did think it was interesting that principals and administrators, that data even sneaks up a little bit, with 87% of principals saying that teachers are their most trusted resource in deciding. Principals and administrators also were more likely to say district staff and school administrators were a trusted resource, and they also, about a third of principals and a little more than that of administrators, say evidence-based reports are something that they consult and trust in terms of which digital learning tools to use. Now, with these data leaders, I don't want to imply that educators are telling us that they don't have any information available about what digital learning tools to use, but I did think it was important, especially when looking at administrators, that not quite 2 in 10 say they have a lot of information available about the effectiveness of the tools that they use in their school district. Now, many more did say that some information is available, so I do want to qualify that, but I still think that this shows there is room for more information about what tools do for these leaders to be informed about their selections. Now, bear with me. I am a research consultant, so I know these are a lot of data points on this slide, but we did this very much on purpose. We're a little intentional about things like that. So we had many factors that educators could rate in terms of their importance for selecting digital learning tools. As you can see, we dug into a lot of possible factors. The reason that I'm showing you all of these data points is I was struck by the fact that majorities of principals and administrators say that they're either important or extremely important for making their selections. So if you scroll your eyes to the bottom of the page, you'll see about 6 in 10 principals and administrators say that saving time for themselves and principals is an important or extremely important factor for selecting. Now, of course, I have the top 2 highlighted there for you. Provides immediate and actionable data on student progress and allows for personalized instruction. More than 9 in 10 said that those were important. I think as a Board of Education member, and over the last 10 years, and I've seen how intentional our administrators are in their selections, I thought about all of the things they truly do consider as they're making those very critical selections to help students learn and grow in classrooms. So I really liked this series of items that we're just going to summate here for you, where we asked them to think about digital learning tools relative to non-digital learning tools that they use. And we asked them to say whether those digital learning tools were more effective than, less effective than, or as effective as the non-digital learning tools that they use. And these were 3 areas that majorities of all 3 educator populations actually said that they're more effective than the non-digital learning tools they use. Connecting learning to students' future jobs and careers, personalizing instruction, engaging students with school and learning. Here at Gallup, we were particularly excited to see about that engagement factor as well. We spend a lot of time measuring that in schools, so I thought it was interesting that those were 3 that floated to the top in terms of being more effective. Once again, we have a couple of these slides with lots of data points, but I love these. This is a series of items where we ask students to describe for us the digital learning tools that they're using. Now, we wanted to be really mindful for our younger students in grades 3, 4, and 5 to lower the burden on their survey taking, and so we had 2-point scales for them, % yes and % no. But for older students in grades 6 through 12, we had 5-point scales. So what you're looking at here, the % yeses, that's the green bar for the younger students, and for the older students, you can see the % agrees and strongly agrees, the 4s and 5s combined. So now where I would maybe caution against directly comparing their responses across both populations for any given item, the reason I think it's helpful to see the data this way is because you can see that there are some similarities in terms of what they rank in terms of these descriptions, and they were very similar, so hence we put some boxes around the top 4 and the bottom 3. So for both younger and older students, they say digital learning tools are fun, they help them learn things on their own, they help them learn at their own pace, and they think they make school more interesting, hearkening back to that engagement piece that we saw a little bit ago from from educators. And then as you see the box in the bottom three, these scored lowest, if you will, in this rank order and their descriptions. I want to use digital learning tools more often outside of school. I have a couple students in my house. If that means doing more homework at my house, maybe that's a reason that made it at the more at the bottom of the list. They help me focus better in class. And then the last one on the list here is I need more help to use digital learning tools. I think this shows just how savvy students are about using these tools. When 2 in 10 older students agree they need more help, they seem pretty savvy about these. So I thought that was pretty interesting and fun to see. At school, how often do you use digital learning tools to learn? I had mentioned this earlier, where about half of teachers say their students use them every day. Close to 6 in 10 students say we use them every day. And about a third say they use them a few days a week. And when we ask students, would you like to use them more often, less often, or about as often as you use them now, about 4 in 10 students say they'd like to use them more often, and about half say about as often as they use them now, with just 8% saying they'd like to use them less often. Now, if a student reported that they use them less often in a day, they were a little bit more likely to say they wanted to use them more often. We're going to show you some more data about these, but we had a series of items that asked educators their perceptions about digital learning tools, and they do see great value in them. On the left side of your screen that you're looking at, you'll see at least 8 in 10 of all 3 educator groups agree or strongly agree that they see great value in using them now, and just a stitch more say they see great value in using them in the future. And if you scroll all the way to the right, still majorities, but fewer, say they help students focus. So about 6 in 10 agree or strongly agree of teachers. Now, we shouldn't play favorites as research consultants, but just have to share that I did really like this particular survey item, which we used and sort of reappropriated for some work that we've done in higher education with faculty around Edtech. And we asked our educator populations to indicate their comfort level with increased use of digital learning tools. And there was a 5-point scale from which they could select. Now, I think with this item, we have a little bit of a high bar when we're asking them to think about increased use. So we really didn't ask them only about their level of support but we were asking them to report on their increased use and how comfortable they were with that. So the green bar that you're seeing is the percent who fully support increased use. The blue bar is somewhat support, with gray being neutral, and the other two being somewhat do not or do not at all support. You can see the administrators' data on top, with 3/4 of them reporting that they fully support increased use, with another 2 in 10 saying they somewhat support increased use. And then with principals, close, about 7 in 10 fully support increased use, and about 1/4 somewhat support. Now for teachers, 8 in 10, more than that, 85%, at least somewhat support, but you do notice some variance there in that percentage who say they fully support increased use. And I think that's important because I think back about teachers being our most trusted resource across educator groups in terms of which digital learning tools they use. And I think this reminds us that we need to continue to consult that group of experts and really know what's happening on the ground in terms of teaching and learning in classrooms. So leaders, that is just a highlight of some of the findings that we have in our report. We do hope that you'll go ahead and dig into that on some of these areas that you find most interesting and relevant for your good work in supporting teaching and learning in classrooms. It is my privilege now to invite our next guest to the stage. Stacey Childress is CEO of NewSchools, and I'm delighted to also have Sean Kavanaugh, who will be interviewing her, who is managing editor, EdWeek Market Brief. Please join me in welcoming our leaders to the stage.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. As was mentioned, I'm Sean Kavanaugh. I'm the managing editor of EdWeek Market Brief. We're an intelligence service that seeks to explain the needs and priorities of K-12 school districts to companies and other organizations doing business in the K-12 market. And many of the issues that are laid out in this report are of great interest to us about teachers' appetite for technology, what seems to appeal to teachers about technology and what does not appeal, what we need to work on. And I know these issues are of great interest to Stacey, CEO of NewSchools, and dating back to your time at Gates, I used to cover some of the research that you all did on many of these same topics. I wanted to start by asking you, I know that there is this perception out there about teachers, this image, particularly in the Edtech community, that we hear of all the time, that not only are teachers novices with technology, but they're actually tech resistant. But the survey results really counter that perception in some ways. It suggests that a lot of teachers actually have a very positive view of technology in a lot of contexts. Why is that? Where's that disconnect in terms of the way we're thinking about how teachers see technology and the reality of the situation?
Yeah, and I think you put it well, Sean. We should try to be realistic about what's happening in classrooms, what teachers are actually doing, and how they're using tools and how they're not using tools. Oftentimes, folks ask if we're more optimistic or more pessimistic about where EdTech is going or how teachers are doing, and in our work, we just try to be realistic versus optimistic or pessimistic. And so I think the great thing about this survey is it does give us some really good information about what teachers think. I mean, as you said, it's hard to square the critique of teachers as tech resistant or Luddites with the information from the survey, when most teachers in most schools in America are using digital tools at least a few days a week, if not every day. It's clear that they see some value in it. They've got access across different kinds of schools and different kinds of classrooms, different subject areas. And so I think what that does, rather than continue to focus on what boosters of technology might say about teachers or what critics of EdTech might say about classrooms, to actually listen to teachers and then ask better questions and focus on things that can actually help teachers get what they need to use the EdTech tools they have available to them to really drive student learning in ways that are priorities for them in their classrooms. So that's one of the motivations we had for commissioning the survey with Gallup in the first place, was to actually get beyond the noise and the battle about whether technology is good or bad, and see what teachers actually thought, what students actually thought. And so we were pleased with a lot of what we saw, and also surprised by some of it, as I think you were too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to mention also that the survey found that principals and district administrators are even more inclined to say that digital tools are at least as effective as non-digital tools.
Yeah.
So they're not Luddites either in many respects. So why do you believe that administrators are showing even more faith in these tools than teachers? How do you interpret that?
Yeah, well, there's not a clear answer in the data, obviously, about why that is, but there could be a couple of different reasons. On the one hand, you could say, and I think it's pretty clear in the data, that the further you are away from the classroom as an education professional, the more aspirational your view about the power of technology. And that could be because, unlike teachers, principals and administrators aren't having to wrestle day in and day out with implementation challenges, with maybe mismatches between what a tool says it can do and the strengths and limitations it actually has in their context. So that could be one reason, that just the day-to-day usage gives you better information, and it doesn't make you skeptical, but it makes you a little less naive about what can be accomplished. But I think there's another possible explanation too, which is usually a teacher in their classroom has just their own experience to base their perceptions on of any single tool or a range of tools they may have, where a principal actually can see implementations across many classrooms and see some variability there. A district leader can see across many schools and hear feedback across many schools, see results, student outcomes that are coming across many implementations versus just one at hand. And therefore, with that more macro view, might have a more positive or forward-looking faith in what EdTech can do. So it's probably a combination of those two things, just kind of a lack of visibility on the one hand of what's going on the ground, but then also a more macro view across many implementations that might be a more positive explanation for why they're more aspirational.
And I would think that also these groups of school employees are very different. They have different needs.
Yeah.
I mean, the school administrator is in many cases the public face of the district.
Right.
They're the buyer the decision maker, and so they're answering to taxpayers, whereas the teacher has, in one sense, a more narrow perspective, and they're worried about the interests in their classroom. But I wanted to also ask you, there was one of the findings in the survey that most surprised me was that teachers are an extremely trusted resource in terms of when people are trying to figure out, well, what should our tech strategy be? What kinds of tech tools are we interested in? Principals, school administrators, and teachers themselves turn to teachers.
Yeah.
How surprised by you were that particular finding?
Yeah, I don't think our team was necessarily surprised at the fact that teachers were the most trusted resource. I think what was surprising to us, certainly I don't want to speak for the whole team, what was surprising to me was just how true that was. You covered the Teachers Know Best survey that was similar that we did on my team at the Gates Foundation back in 2014, and I think the numbers were in the low 40s, 41 or 42% of teachers said that other teachers were their most trusted resource. And here it's over 80%. So one way to think about that is over a 5-year period, teachers' trust in each other about digital learning tools has doubled. And as you said, even more so for principals and school leaders. And so we've thought some about why that might be. It's not surprising that teachers would be the most trusted resource, but just the magnitude of the finding and the change over time is interesting. And I think there could be a few things. I mean, one, I think in a very healthy way, the field has just gotten a lot more focused in the last 10 years, 5 years, on the importance of teacher voice and teacher leadership. And I think that's permeating a lot of conversations we're having about where expertise lies in the system, and I think that's exactly right and a good thing. I think the rise of kind of teacher-driven resources online, so the explosion of teachers pay teachers, which is still such a surprising phenomenon to me, that just continues to grow and grow, is a signal of this as well. Teachers trust in each other, and I think having a tool like that reinforces that nascent or native trust they have in each other. Or things like EdReports, which certainly is designed to be a more rigorous review of curricular resources, but those doing the reviews are teachers, and so it is a teacher expertise-driven model. And I think as those things have just become more well-known and more used, it reinforces the idea that teachers know best, that we should be asking teachers what they think and acting on their advice. And then the other thing I would say about this, Sean, is that I think it might be a natural evolution that follows adoption. And so it was surprising to us that 65% of teachers say they're using digital resources every day, even though we're in the business of following this. We knew, I think I would have guessed well over half, but I don't know, I would have said, well over 60%, and that 85% wanted to use them even more. So I think that ubiquity, the way that Edtech and digital tools has permeated just the day-to-day instructional life of teachers and students means that teachers see each other as having every single day more and more lived experience and wisdom with the tools. And so as adoption has really taken off in the last 5 years, the point at which that expertise and sometimes pain and heartache is being developed is happening down the hall, or across the hall. I don't have to go to a website to find a teacher across the country or a researcher or an expert across the country. I can walk next door in my classroom because every day we're trying to accomplish the same things.
And I know it's, just speaking from the research we've done at Edweek Market Brief, one of the frustrations out there among a lot of policymakers is that they wish that more academic research, say, was brought to K-12 tech adoption, but the reality is it's a peer-to-peer market, both in terms of what administrators are looking for. They trust the superintendent across the state, across the district, and clearly, according to this research, it reinforces that teachers trust the teacher down the hall in the next district, someone they know in their peer group.
Yeah, so. And it's interesting, this point about what value do teachers and principals and district administrators place on evidence-based reports. Valerie mentioned in her opening that data, which at first glance can seem kind of surprising, with usage so high and trust in evidence-based reports seemingly low, what might be going on there. And I think there's a real opportunity. Again, the debate, I think, isn't anymore, if we're going to be realistic about what's happening in classrooms, the debate isn't should or shouldn't EdTech be present in our classrooms. It is. Almost every classroom, almost every day. And so I think the kind of productive response to mismatches in data like that is to say, all right, what battles should we be fighting as a field in our efforts to support student learning more effectively and to support what teachers are trying to do? Why don't teachers trust evidence-based reports more? It's not that they don't care about evidence, like day in and day out on our work. That's just not true. I think what's true is the reports themselves often aren't that useful to a teacher in his or her classroom. They're just not. I consume lots of those kinds of things, and sometimes I'm not sure what they're trying to say. You just kind of wade through trying to look for the signal through the noise of the report. So as we get more sophisticated as a field about measuring the effectiveness of tools, we also have to get more plain spoken and finely tuned to teachers' needs, rather than writing these efficacy reports for other researchers, right, or writing them for philanthropists or or guys who hang around in think tanks and write blogs. Like the thing to keep in mind is that teachers do want evidence. They want to be able to have that along with the advice of their colleagues to make good decisions, not only what to use, but how to use it effectively in their classrooms. And what's available to them is not useful.
And so
for that.
Just to press you a bit on that, if you had to get at what you think is the flaw between the disconnect between the evidence that's out there, the reports, this sort of body of academic research, and what teachers need, is it that research just seems too abstract, that it's not getting at the problems that exist in the classroom day to day? Where do you think that disconnect most often occurs?
I think there are probably many things. It looks like out in the audience, people have lots of ideas about the best answer to that question. So I'm not going to turn the mic over.
Oh, were some hands shooting up?
They were like,
okay.
Just so the chatter started around the room. So we probably have lots better answers collectively than I'll have individually. But so I would say a couple of things. I kind of alluded to it in a somewhat sarcastic way a second ago. But I think the way in which social science research in general and education efficacy research in particular, and as a subset Edtech or digital tools research, all the incentives are aligned in a way, kind of driven by what we say is high quality research, that it just takes a long time. Because if you're going to do large enough sample sizes over long enough periods of time, and then you have to go through the analysis and the synthesis and production of the report, the tool might not even be the same anymore. So like the mismatch between the time horizon of product development, sales cycle, in use, and what something that is gold standard research might say at the end, that those just don't work on the same timelines. So that's one contributor. So there are a lot of folks in our field trying to find rigorous yet more rapid cycle and concrete ways, or more kind of implementation realistic ways of measuring on faster cycles, and with, again, more regular language to describe what's going on with tools. So I think that's one. And then, one of the things that we hear in our conversations with teachers that we didn't necessarily ask in this specific way in the survey is that, for better or worse, even if something is relatively easily accessible in terms of the way it's presented and written, it is done in-house by the company, by the EdTech company, or it's paid for by the company, or its investors, or its funders. And that's a real challenge because it's expensive to do the kind of research that actually leads to real advice about efficacy. So someone has to pay for it. We encourage companies to do efficacy evaluations throughout, and so I think companies are trying to take that advice. And yet, from a teacher's perspective, just like we are in real life about things that we buy. If it's not a third-party recommendation, I'm gonna be less trusting of it.
Right.
If there's some kind of motive behind it, which is please buy more of my things, then my evidence that I've paid for and that is under my brand for my product is naturally going to be a little less trustworthy. Whether that's fair or not is kind of beside the point. Realistically, it's a rational response, I think, for teachers to have.
And sometimes what we found is that companies and school districts, if a company arranges to implement a product in a district, it isn't on the same page with the district about what the research requirements will be. Well, how am I going to conduct a relatively rigorous study? And by the time they realize what's needed, it's too late.
Yes. I mean, randomly assigning children to use this great new thing we've bought that we have a lot of confidence in that will help improve learning outcomes. Some get it and some don't. But there are real tensions in that as educators, as parents. And so whether you're at the classroom level as a teacher, principal, or district administrator, those are real trade-offs and very hard decisions, and yet without the ability to do that more random assignment, it does decrease a bit the quality of the evidence that we get. So continuing to think hard, and I see some folks in the audience that I know are working on this day in and day out, thinking hard about ways that we can kind of lower the trade-offs or lessen the number of trade-offs that educators have to make in the day-to-day as it relates to what a company is trying to demonstrate it can do for them. And as you said earlier, that the buyer, the district superintendent as the face to the community, has at stake in terms of both improving outcomes and showing that they've made a good decision with public resources across many schools. There are real trade-offs inherent in that.
One of the other findings in the report that I wanted to ask you about was the survey looked at teachers' criteria for selecting digital products. And one of the things that ranked really high was their ability to provide, the product's ability to provide immediate and actionable data on students' academic progress, followed by the ability to help with personalized instruction. This is a term that's, dominated the landscape over the past few years. What does this hunger among teachers for digital tools that deliver data suggest about today's K-12 learning environment?
Yeah.
And the needs of educators?
Yeah, I think it's a complex story, actually, Sean. I mean, I think it would be disingenuous to, gloss over the investment and priority over the last 20 years at the system level in generating data, both for information, also for accountability. I mean, we've been in a couple of decades of focus that has led to not only from accountability standpoint, but the kind of the prioritization and lauding of data-driven instruction. So I think it's not too surprising that after 20 years of focus in that way, teachers value, or at least feel as if they must be able to show and act on data in their classrooms. So I think that's true, so I would stipulate that. But then I'd also say, I think, as you said, the second ranking purpose was personalized learning. And I think teachers were asking more and more of teachers all the time. Teachers are asking more and more of themselves because they see the needs that their kids are bringing into the classroom, and they see the tools that are available to them to help address those needs, and the possibility that you could more frequently address every child's needs more often is very inspiring, I think, to many teachers. And so having better information about those different learner profiles that students bring into the classroom. Where is it that individual students might need more support to be able to undo common misunderstandings, for instance, in math? Which ones for which students? Having more information about that can just be a treasure trove for a math instructor. What kinds of supports and scaffolding do some students need to be able to access grade level standards in English language arts? There's a lot of talk about that these days, but what's the different pattern of understanding and need that different students have? And so teachers seeing the promise that tools might be able to bring to them and giving them more rich information about that they can then act on. I think the reality is it's still not quite there yet. You know, it's lots of information. Oftentimes tools don't work well together. Oftentimes they're not well aligned with the classroom context or with the core curriculum that teachers are being asked to implement. So I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of this. Still a long way to go and still lots of complications day in and day out. But I think there's both the focus on accountability for so long, elevating data as a valuable thing for better or worse, but then also just the promise of what we might be able to do if we understood each learner's profile and strengths and needs more effectively, and the promise, if not quite yet the reality, of the ability of digital tools to help teachers just do that more effectively.
Right, and I know that the goal of personalized learning, tailoring instruction to the individual student has been around for decades. That's not new.
Not new.
Technology is seen as the vehicle for making a great leap forward in that area. Whether it can live up to that expectation, no one's
Still an
certain.
open question.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the other findings was that got at this question of what do administrators do when they feel an Edtech product isn't working. 65% of K-12 administrators say their district has stopped using a digital learning tool that was piloted or adopted, and the most common reason they cited was that the tool did not improve learning outcomes. Now, I suppose you could see that in a very negative light, in that 2/3 of products were jettisoned after they didn't work, or maybe that's the way the market should be working. How do you see that number in terms of, and the fact that district administrators saw a failure to improve learning outcomes as what straw that broke the camel's back?
Yeah, and I know they're asking us to wrap up, so I will give my answer, and then we can move on. I do want to clarify. I think from my understanding of the data, while 65 or 67% of folks have said they have jettisoned a tool because it doesn't work, I don't think it says that 67% of tools didn't work.
Right. No, that's correct. Yes.
Maybe, but I don't think that's what I don't think that's what the data said. So on the one hand, it's great news, right? That if a district leader or a principal or a teacher brings something into their classroom that is not living up to their hopes or their expectations for improving student learning, that they are quite willing to cut it loose. I think that's how healthy adoption ought to work. The darker side of that is, wouldn't it be great if two things: products actually worked better from the beginning in a variety of classroom contexts, so that it wasn't so fragile about whether or not, as advertised or as designed, a tool that was adopted to help drive student learning was kind of a coin flip about whether or not it was going to work well or not, and that we're constantly having to churn through resources. I think teachers do this with digital or non-digital resources. Like if something isn't getting you the results you want, you're going to cut it loose. We hope that teachers will do that. So I don't think that's a distinctive feature of digital tools. However, I do think we've got work to do as a field to say, let's design products that are less fragile, less precious, that can stand up to the rigors of different classroom contexts, designed for variability rather than designing for perfect implementation. I think if that were true, we'd see that number go down. And I also think to the conversation we were having earlier about information. I think if we had better information available to adopters and buyers of these tools that was more tailored to their needs in decision making, perhaps the decision would be more intelligent and more well informed in the first place, such that you'd see fewer instances where we had to cut something loose because it wasn't living up to what we thought it could do. So we have a clearer understanding of what it actually could do.
Yes, we are at the end of our allotted time. And we're going to move on to a panel offering a diversity of opinions on how to interpret the numbers in this survey. But if you'll join me in thanking Stacey Childress for her thoughts today. Thank you.
introduce our guests. How is that? Perfect. Welcome so much. We have Michelle Brown, who is founder and CEO of CommonLit. Joe Garofalo is from the Make to Learn Lab at the Curry School of Education at UVA. Tanika Cheek-Clayton has been, along with her good colleague Justin, a tremendous partner over the last year in this study, and she is managing partner at NewSchools. And Courtney Deneau is PK-4 at DC Public Schools, a teacher there. And Courtney, we know you have a lot of VIPs who need your expertise, and we're particularly grateful for your sharing it with us today. Thanks so much. I'm going to kick it over to my good friend and colleague, Stephanie Markin, Executive Director of Gallup Education Research.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So I thought I would just start off. I would love to hear from each of you, your point of view, maybe the most interesting, most surprising, most exciting, disappointing, any of those feelings, finding that you found in the report. Would love to hear just your point of view. So maybe we'll start with you, Courtney.
Well, in lieu of what was just mentioned in the previous discussion, talking about the aspect of the number of teachers that feel that technology is giving them that personalized lens of what children's knowledge base is, and moving that forward and being able to differentiate classroom teaching, instruction, what's going on in various centers or places in the classroom with their students, and also gaining some background knowledge of their of what they know and how they process information. And also an appreciation for, I know that a lot of the numbers were 3 through 5, but also looking at some of our youngest learners. I'm an early childhood teacher, primarily for 3, 4, and 5 years olds, but looking at instructors of early learning, special ed classrooms, ELL classrooms, and really looking at the wealth and diversity of schools and learners that are engaged with technology and accessing that and using that within their settings.
Joe, what about you? What resonated most?
While there were a lot of good things, I think, in the report, overall, I had a feeling of disappointment in the results. And my reason for that is when I looked at the tables describing what kids were using technology for, the teachers said, number one, practice what was learned, exercises, learn new information, watch videos, take tests. I'm thinking this is all low-level stuff. And so I was very disappointed in that. Overall, in the report, I saw next to nothing about teachers and kids using technology to facilitate deeper learning, and just not in here. So I was sort of disappointed in that. As I went through the data, there's a number of reasons for that, which we could talk about in answering your questions, but that was my overall feel. It was my gut feel when I first looked at it. And then taking the train up from Charlottesville yesterday, I went through in much more detail, and I have lots of notes about why that might be the case. And so,
like a good educator, lots of notes. Thank you for
now,
that.
even though I started out saying I was disappointed in the low level, not of use in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. I'm a big advocate for the use of technology in schools. So I want to put that out there. I mean, I prepare my pre-service teachers to use lots of things, but it's for deeper learning and being creative and helping kids understand math. I'm a math educator, to help them understand math and apply math rather than just be able to do exercises. In the math ed world, we refer to problems not as exercises. Problems are things that you don't immediately know what to do or understand. Has to be within your realm of possibility, and you have to be motivated to work it out, okay? That's the good stuff for us, okay? I don't see that in here if the number one use is practicing exercises.
That's a good point. How about you, Michelle?
A few things. One is that teachers were the #1 most trusted source to find digital tools. That is 100%. We're like, oh, duh. CommonLit has 12 million now registered teachers and students, and we have no dedicated marketing team. We've spread primarily through teacher-to-teacher word of mouth, and if you look at our user map and the growth of this like tremendous growth. We don't have a lot of teachers that are like lone teacher users in schools. Like they're clustered in schools. So we know that teachers are going across the hall and telling other teachers about our program. Another thing that resonated with me, I was a reading teacher, was the idea that you trust teachers as the #1 source. Of course, because all of these reports, while they're great and they may inform practice or think tanks or entrepreneurs, these reports have nothing to do with usability. And we have looked at, our product team has sat in front of these products that have gotten highly, highly rated marks on Ed reports, and we do not know what to click on. Literally, we have no idea. We have a lot of questions. And the usability thing is really, really hard to get right. And it's especially hard to get right in the upper grades, when students need to, just the dynamics that you want to have in a rich, high school English language arts classroom. I have not seen, including our own, an interface that actually helps that come true. Speaking about deeper learning. So that's just the two main thoughts that I had.
Thanks. Tanika's had the most time with the data, so you've had a lot of time to marinate on this decision. What resonated most with you, or maybe surprised you most?
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought was really surprising, the question about as are more effective than non-digital tools, like the overwhelming response that digital tools were as or more effective across a lot of different factors, I thought was pretty surprising to me, because when we put that question in, I expected to see more variability in that. And then I think what's encouraging for me is how people are thinking about the potential of technology and what is to come. And it may not, like Joe said, it may not exist as we want it to be, but I think teachers see the potential and how it can be used. And I'm excited about a lot of Edtech that's out there that's converging artificial intelligence, voice recognition, and machine learning to actually be able to get teachers that actionable data in real time while students are playing and learning at the same time they're being assessed. And so, I guess the sentiment I could see out there is teachers are excited about it, and we were trying to look at where are there gaps in availability and perceptions of effectiveness across a lot of different subject areas, and it was overwhelmingly positive. And so, in looking at that, I was just like, wow, so people tend to generally be satisfied, but yet they see that there's a lot more value that could, even more so in the future. And so I thought that was exciting and encouraging.
Thanks for that. So Courtney, I thought we'd start with you, since you know classrooms better than I'm going to assume most in this room or in general. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tanika was mentioning how technology is being used now, how it could be used in the future. What are some of the most exciting ways you see EdTech being used right now in present day? Any anecdotes or best use cases that you've seen?
Well, I think with the technology movement, when we talk about STEM and sort of the expansion of that with STEAM, with the arts and technology, and also the use of technology for a more holistic, we talk about this global competency and using those tools to access what's going on. When I think of an individual child in the context of my classroom community, my neighborhood, and a global perspective, and how technology can connect them with what's going on in the outside world, talking about specific projects, thinking about the changing project that was done a few years ago along the H Street corridor and the revitalization of certain neighborhoods in the district, and how that impacts people in my neighborhood, people that I know as a student that I connect with on a daily basis. So looking at citywide plans and how things are changing and evolving, and then going out, using of that tool that encourages me and my teacher to go out and visit with some of these people, and how that affects us as a community. And then what can I do to develop a voice? and how can I share that perspective from students and other people that I am with in this neighborhood. So that's just one example of where technology can be a source to get out. So a more global perspective, utilized in conjunction with other modalities in the classroom, and also that sort of that humanitarian piece that we're seeing a lot of. So making a difference and creating a sense of social responsibility, I think has been valuable, that I've seen a lot of recent years.
Yeah, that's helpful. Michelle, you mentioned in the introduction how teachers were actually selecting these tools, and you noted what we, I think, all kind of anticipated with the research, which is that they were mostly using other teachers as their resource. And so I was curious, from your point of view, what factors should they be using? Are those the right factors in the way we saw them in the data, or were there other factors that you thought maybe should be higher?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think here's my perspective, is digital tools are not inherently better because they're digital. I just don't think that that's true. I think that what digital tools can do better is change behavior at scale. And, I mean, just look at like Uber, or how we all are using our phones to do social media. I mean, it definitely does that better. So our perspective is, okay, well, what are the actual behavior changes that we want to see in classrooms? And for us, our approach was, let's actually go back to the research on what teachers and students are actually doing in classrooms that are highly effective and that have high teacher and student satisfaction in addition to outcomes. And so we actually looked at like the studies and the research and backwards planned from the 10 instructional moves that we wanted to see that we know make a difference for students. One is like teaching academic vocabulary explicitly, or asking text-dependent questions. These are small changes that we know are transformative for teachers and for interests. And so I think that our approach has been, let's actually meet teachers where they are in their workflow, in their current workflows, and use technology to nudge teachers to do these changes that we know make a difference, and also cut out a lot of the administrative stuff that teachers have to do, paper management and data management, so that we can like make our teachers like the superheroes of classrooms. So I would say, I don't know exactly what criteria that is, but I do know that if you are a teacher, it doesn't take very long. You just know. You have a gut check where you know if a digital tool that you're looking at is going to make you a superhero or if it's going to make your life miserable.
Hopefully more superhero.
Yeah.
Tanika, you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks one of the findings that I think resonated the most with Gallup team members, which was that the majorities of educators were saying that digital learning tools were more effective in some cases than others. And I was curious for your perspective, you know so much about these tools individually, but also as a group, do you think there are some learning objectives that are just best achieved by digital learning tools? And then more specifically, are there some ways that tech still has a further way to go?
Yeah, so absolutely on both. One, there's technology out there where students can actually read to a virtual avatar, and it is able to identify students at risk for dyslexia at a 99% accuracy rate. Like things like that really can change the trajectory of understanding a student's learner profile are just extremely important. Valuable data and information that teachers, parents, and students can have about themselves that technology can do at scale to some degree that an individual teacher just can't. So we need supports. We need to continue to provide those supports to teachers. I think in terms of, is there a lot of room to grow? Yes, this technology is early. This is early stuff. Like there's so many exciting things on the horizon that people are really working on right now. There's teams working on technology that can provide feedback to students to help them prepare better thesis statements. When you think about the fact that it requires people giving you feedback to become a better writer, and a teacher that has a class of 30 students, like the time it takes to do that, if a teacher can have support and use AI and machine learning and other things to provide more input and feedback to students, think about how that's going to change a whole group of students that's learning. So I think there's lots of potential, and yes, there are absolutely things that technology can do better than you can do in a classroom. Another example is, if you're learning how to mix chemicals that may be harmful or dangerous that students actually can't do in a lab because it's toxic or it's dangerous, like there are programs that have been created so that you can build atoms or build molecules or do different experiments that you actually can't do in a lab. And so that's the exciting thing about what technology brings to a classroom, but at the same time, we still have a ways to go before it's integrated in a way as seamless as we would all love it to be at this point.
So a lot of the way to go. I love Joe. We talked about this. I was eavesdropping on Joe's conversation during coffee, and I know, Joe, you have a lot of thoughts on what the opportunities are for EdTech to really better support teachers, but also better support learning.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to comment about because a few of my panel colleagues here mentioned the word effectiveness. So looking at figure 31, only 30% of the teachers said the digital learning tools are more effective. 59% said they're as effective. Okay, so I don't see that as the majority think it's more effective. Right? Only 30%. And effective for what? Okay, clearly it was a lot of low-level skills, right? Technology could be very effective for higher level skills. It's just not captured here, right? So the other thing that, and this is one of my pet peeves, I don't like when people say the technology is effective. My laptop is sitting in my bag, okay? It's a piece of technology. It's not helping anybody do anything right now, right? Technology is only effective when the teacher is using it in appropriate ways to help kids learn. It's not the tool, it's the teacher with the tool, right? So whenever I see technology is effective, no, technology is just a thing. A teacher is the one who's effective.
We were talking about this
So
yesterday.
that's
like
one
a
of my
paper,
pet peeves,
a
right?
pencil, a textbook is really only as good as the teachers that are implementing it and the extent to which they have support and development to do so, which I know, Joe, is something we were talking about earlier today as well. What extent is there professional development so the teachers don't have to throw things at students like that pen was just thrown?
Excited, actually.
The enthusiasm
So
over EdTech
there were
is
times in a
significant.
classroom where I threw stuff. And I take a piece of chalk in the old days, because I'm older than most of you, okay? And I would throw a piece of chalk across the room and I said, tell me the equation of its path, okay? That was harder to do. With technology, you could simulate that now. So kids could simulate things like that and understand what quadratic equations are about. So I have thrown things, right? So there's a couple of other things that I want to react to in terms of the report and things people said. The term teacher training, I just hate that term, okay? I think of training, that's for circus animals, okay? For teachers, they need professional development and support and given opportunities to practice integrating appropriate and good uses of technology into their curriculum and instruction. So it's not just about learning what buttons to push and how to navigate drop-down menus. That's important, but that alone does nothing. So the teachers need support, professional development, and even time to figure out how they're going to take these tools and use them to achieve better results.
Yeah.
And so that comes out clearly in here, because 53% of the teachers said, we need help. 46 or 49 said, we're not even sure which tools to use. So, I mean, these teachers are asking for help to use this stuff in better ways.
Yeah, Tanika, you were going to say
I just wanted to point out that yes, you have to use it effectively, but the tool also does have to be effective. So like the screener that I was talking about, if it was only effective 70% of the time, then it wouldn't be a good tool to use. You know what I'm saying? So it's a combination of both.
It's a combination of both, but you could have a really good tool, okay, which will do nothing with a very weak teacher. Flip it around, a really good teacher could do a lot with a simple tool. So it is the combination, but the technology by itself does nothing. It sits there until somebody puts it into action and engages kids in its use. Let me give you a simple example. Okay, all these kids have cell phones in schools right now. I told a bunch of kids, take out your cell phone, go over to that lawn, stand on the corners of the lawn. On your phone, tell me the longitude and latitude of your position and tell me the area of the lawn. There was a lot of deep thinking that had to go on. Algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and understanding from the social studies class what longitude and latitude meant. That wasn't even something designed for teaching, right? So teachers, if they have enough experiences and opportunities, they could take things and do just great and deep thinking activities. Spreadsheets, you could do a million deep thinking kinds of activities.
Yeah.
I think that goes back to the accessibility, for us as teachers, as professionals, as far as, the choices our administrators make, as far as the professional development, the learning that goes on with teachers and instructors, and how tools such as these are utilized. And in lieu of that, with the collaboration with my colleagues in my building, technology and its usage within the classroom context is very different when I came to DC schools 20 years ago. So being able to rely on people around me to be able to access that, and also the facilitation as well. So being given opportunities where this is an app or a piece of, or a website that I might want to use, and with that collaborative piece, learning more about how to utilize that. And yes, my expertise in working with children, making that come to life within the classroom. And if I might add, the accessibility of students and with the certain populations that we were talking about, I'm using as DC as an example, our PARC assessment, 3rd through 5th, the standardized assessment tool, which is now has to be done on the web. Children being able to learn how to navigate. So it's not just about content, but children having face-to-face interaction with how to navigate through questions, writing, keyboarding, and accessing that, and being able to translate and give what they know as far as taking these assessments, which is really, which is with the data-driven information, what we're looking at as educators and policy. So being able to give that to each student, I might be a classroom teacher, and I might have to teach those skills to the children in my class, but I might only have 2 iPads or 2 PCs, and being able to rotate that. So thinking about the accessibility piece as well, and how to utilize effectively.
Yeah. Danica, I had a question for you. We talked a little bit about in the study about the use of digital learning tools to connect students to jobs and careers. And I was curious from your point of view, why that was so important, and to what extent you see Edtech as being an important solution in that.
Yes. Generally speaking, and I see this with the schools that we work with, and then just in the conversations that we've had, a lot of people are thinking about what are the pathways looking like for current students, and what are their career and job opportunities going to be, and how can we expose them, have them learn and explore now. And so we were really just in the technology that we see that's out there that's able to actually connect professionals and engage students in like real work experiences that they wouldn't normally be able to get just by going to school every day, was something that was really interesting, and we wanted to include that as part of the survey to really understand how they value it, how students value it, and whether or not teachers, principals, and administrators value it. And overwhelmingly it came back, yes, we see technology as something that's really important in terms of connecting students and helping to engage them. But I think when I think about where the market is and what tools are out there to really make these connections and help students explore, I think there's still a long way to go. I see a lot more traction, a lot more, at least even with my own high schooler, in the types of products and things that they have available to explore the different types of careers and investigate and kind of learn what different people do. It's exciting, and so I guess there's potential there, but the market of tools, there's still some ways to go to really support, I think, where people want it to be.
I know we had originally planned 15 minutes for questions, but now we have about 5 to 10. But I'm sure everybody in this room talks very quickly. So if you do have a question, would love to hear from you. Please feel free to just raise your hand and we'll get a mic runner over to you to make sure that you can fully be heard. And please feel free to direct them at a specific person, but I'm sure everybody would be happy to answer your questions also afterwards if we have time.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Dan Brown from the Jefferson Education Exchange, and thanks for this excellent report and great event. And this was really for anyone on the panel, but our whole contingent here was kind of a Twitter with this piece about how only about a quarter of teachers and principals say they have access to a lot of information about if their digital tools are working, even though overwhelmingly they want to use them going forward. So we're obsessed with like helping people get more information to make wiser choices about this stuff, because 75% don't have this information. But I'm interested in your thoughts about what do you think accounts for the 25% who say they do? Like where this is going well or where people perceive that it's going well in terms of having this good information about effectiveness. What do you think we can learn from that, and what do you think that's all about?
I'm happy to take a stab at this. So I think there are some people that are very clear about the outcomes that they're trying to achieve when they use tools, and they pick tools that are focused on those particular outcomes. They may talk to other teachers, and they know that the product that they've picked is designed for their students, and they look at and they track themselves, like, is this actually working? And so, I mean, I think we all play a role in this. I mean, as an investor, like, I want to look for products and invest in products that are thinking about, I know what the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve are. I know what the teachers and students have to do to get those outcomes, and I'm making it very clear to them what they have to do. And I want them to have that information. And then as educators or teachers, principals and administrators that are using it, they have to be very clear, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the outcome that we're trying to have? What tools are out there? Is it designed for this purpose? Let's use it, let's try it out. At the end of 3 to 6 months, is it working? And I think that there are people that are doing that, and I think that you see that reflected in that.
I'll just add that, we're on the phone with district leaders every day, and our sense of it is that there is a sea change happening, and I think it's because districts have been burned by piloting bad tools. I think we see that in the data. 65% or whatever have said, you know what, we're not going to use this anymore, it's not working. And they're starting to ask us, hey, you mentioned that your assessments are valid. Could you send over that 8-page white paper about your validity? And we're like, oh, cool, we have that. You want to read it? And, because we thought, it's too wonky, don't put that in our marketing materials, nobody will read it. But it's changing. And I think that district leaders know what they want. And so I think that this is a positive trend.
So let me just add to that a little bit. Most administrators and teachers don't read research journals. They don't have time. Teachers, some of them will read practitioner journals. And there are articles in those journals like, I did this with my 5th grade class, and this is what the kids did. And so a lot of those teachers will get information from that. I use this piece of technology to teach this concept to these kids in this way. And so if a teacher reads that in the journal, that's information about the potential effectiveness of some use. And then, as everybody's alluded to, and including the report, sometimes teachers, probably most of the time, get information from other teachers. I did this in my trig class, and the kids were able to do that. they might consider that, hey, that's information about effective use.
Other questions?
Thank you. I'm David Hallwig. I'm with Intelliven. When we talk about evidence-based, the need for evidence-based outcomes and results being too arcane for most people to read, and we look at empirical methodology of going down the hall and seeing what other people are doing, and the time lag that exists between those functions and the fact that by the time empirical reviews are done, version 2.0 is already out there, right? And you're already behind the, so I guess I wonder what any of the panelists' view would be that the sea change in the classroom has not necessarily been met with the sea change or organizational adaptation to evaluating technology, that when you look at professional development for teachers in using technology, that professional development may have to be in evaluating technology and maybe adapting something like the agile methodologies at the school district level or at the school level to be able to more effectively and quickly really empower everybody and enable everybody to do those sorts of evaluations. Who works on that? I mean, who solves that problem?
I mean, my feeling is that investors, philanthropies need to incentivize software edtech companies to do short cycle randomized testing all the time, and to have that be part of the way that they do usability design. Because I agree with you, we can't wait for a 3-year randomized control trial study and then when it gets put on the What Works clearinghouse. I mean, we're on version 12.0 by that point. So, but it's actually, good software development principles are that you have outcome measures, and that like Facebook has like an A and B and C and D version of Facebook that they randomly assign, and they can get instantly to know which version is the best. What if we incentivize edtech companies to do that with student outcome measures of like which version actually works, and that is part of their usability criteria? But so far I have not seen any company talk about that or really do that.
And I'll just say, as an investor, it's something that we highly prioritize, and we're looking for help in the field on this, because this idea of rapid cycle studies and really understanding effectiveness in short snippets that actually make sense. We fund research studies, small-scale research studies for all of the ventures that we invest in, and we really have spent a lot of time trying to map out what a research journey looks like for an edtech company so that they can continue to test, starting with usability, feasibility in classrooms, understanding outcomes and efficacy, and we're working with lots of different research partners on this, and we're pushing them to come up with more rapid cycle studies to provide the type of information, and we're working with them on messaging. What can you say after you do research or after you do a particular study? What statements can you make about the product? Does it make sense to teachers and administrators? And so we're trying to push on our end, but we need support from the community as well, because there aren't a lot of people investing in this. And companies that are just starting out don't have a lot of cash to, you're trying to convince them, okay, you have to invest in the research, but it's like, the trade-offs. It's like, how much do you invest in this piece versus how much do you invest in growing and scaling the business and making sure you're getting, things out there. I think some of the best companies or products that have come out of this that I've seen are when the entrepreneurs really spend kind of like the first 1 to 2 years doing research and building the product and ensuring that there's product market fit, and then work on scaling later, and they have kind of a research cycle or just capacity built into their company. But that's very few. And a lot of companies are started by teachers that don't necessarily have the research background. And so I think it relies on, or to see this continue to grow and improve in the market, there's going to have to be a good connection between the educators, the people that are trying out products, as there are people that are early adopters that see a pain point and they want to go with an entrepreneur that's building something, got to work in partnership and be open to testing and innovating. And so we need to see more of those partnerships between researchers, entrepreneurs, and educators to really push this.
And may I add the buy-in from teachers and administrators. You know, you receive a budget, a yearly budget as a principal, and whether or not your district is investing in these research-based methods. So for principals who are individualizing for their school, am I going to take a significant portion of my funding to invest in this? And it's really varied across, which varies the results, which is, you know, where one certain areas of the city might have other needs that they need to focus on, and then higher performing areas where they might have had more time for research or funding into that particular technology and research.
We'll have one more question and then
Let me
we'll
just
wrap up.
throw in
Yeah.
one response. There's also sort of a dependent variable problem. Okay, so if you're doing a study on how effective a use of a certain technology is, it's effective for what? And it could be somebody setting up a study is looking at dependent variable A, and people may not be interested in that variable. We want to know how to get kids to do B. And so it makes a difference. You could say using this technology in this way, in this context, leads to more questions answered correctly on this test. You could look at it and say, well, I don't care about that test. Okay, I have other interests. So that's another problem when you're looking at this kind of research.
One last question.
Yes, hi. My name is Maria Perisic, and I'm a mother of a 9th grader and 11th grader in DCPS high school. You mentioned, and thank you very much for this very informative, very interesting presentations. I think that on one side, the teachers have a problem, many parents and teachers have a problem with phones and how the phones are used in the school, and we all know that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as you said, phone is just a technology.
Yeah.
It's just a piece of technology for information in any case. So it will be great when you do the surveys like this that you can go first to the teachers and ask them. The teachers will tell you, oh, I need a computer in my room because I will use a computer to present better the information. Or I may use the phone to do this. So that would be a great thing. Instead of going from top, trying to sell the product and then going down, you should actually go from down up to find out on the base what are the needs so that you can get the good product at the end.
I think that was more of a recommendation maybe than a question, but does anybody have one last comment on it?
I would just like to say it was only, I would like to continue on what the two persons there said regarding the computers and regarding the phone. That's all.
Yeah. Any other final comment?
And I'll just say that, you know, that's why we wanted to ask students and teachers really, you know, what they wanted. Like, what do you wish for? What do you want it to do better? What is working and what isn't? And so that was kind of, you know, in part, it was the genesis of why we really wanted to go to the field to understand.
Well, thank you to the panel. Thank you all for being here. Please feel free to stop some of the panelists on the way out if you have any remaining questions.
Okay, good.